Hello, everybody. It's me, Bill Patton. You can see me up at the top there if you're on the Facebook Live. And I'm here with my good friend David Smith. And I had the distinct pleasure. What's on your mug there?
Oh, that's my major coaching style right there.
Oh, nice. So
where I'm laid back.
What a dude! You just look. He's biting his nails and he's worried about the outcome. Yeah, that's terrible. Anyway. So, so it was my distinct pleasure to be able to spend time at your house, sir. That was one of the best trips I've ever had. So
it was fun
for hosting there.
Of course.
Now this isn't just a social call, but what we're talking about here today is I want to encourage John Beaube, who's going to be our gracious host there in Birmingham, Alabama at Greystone. I think it's Greystone or Greystoke. I think I don't.
You know more about it.
I'm going to pretend like it's Greystone Country Club in Birmingham, Alabama, right? And I'm going to encourage him to call this conference "Unlimit Your Potential," because I think that's a big part of what we want to do here. Is we want to kind of work with some misconceptions that some coaches have been operating under. And there's a lot of conventional wisdom, which is good and it's fine and it can work, right? But we want to take things into a little more excellent way so that players can go higher and do more. All right, so let's start with you, Dave. Now, just one other note. If you're thinking that we're going to do a lot of teaching here in this talk, we're not really going to. What we're going to do is we're really trying to open your mind to asking the right questions. And we're also promoting this event in Birmingham, Alabama. And then also one other quick note, I'll be traveling to Atlanta, Georgia. So if you live anywhere near Birmingham, Alabama and Atlanta, Georgia, I have some open clinics and private lesson slots available. Anyway, all right. So Dave, let's dig into it. What are some of the conventional wisdoms that people have that they think are so helpful, but are actually limiting the potential of their players?
Well, number one on that concept is the coach's belief that their players have limitations. I think number one, that is huge. I've seen where coaches tell their players, let's just finish, let's shoot for being second in region or third in region because we've never finished higher than fifth or whatever. And again, that's the concept of creating champions is the first and foremost, you have to believe that you can create champions and you will create champions. But going back on your statement, which is interesting when you said, asking the right questions, I think coaches have to be able to ask questions. I think some coaches go into, we talked about this before the show was recorded, and how coaches oftentimes take over a program and they don't reach out. They don't ask questions of successful coaches, either previous coaches of that program or coaches in the area. And so one of the things I encourage coaches to do, and that's why you and I go to these conventions and these workshops, is to not only share what we know, but also encourage coaches to ask what they can do better. So back to your original statement, potential is defined by what A, you believe your players can do, and B, what your players believe they can do. And so one of the things I've found in my 45 years of teaching and coaching tennis is that there is no defined potential shortage. Every player I've coached, because of the way I coach, the way I get them believing in themselves, simply they achieve far more potential than they ever believed they ever thought possible. And so I've had to start way low on the ladder, move up on the ladder, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's sort of the first thing I would say. I'll let you kind of jump in on that from there.
And, I'm thinking about Alistair McCaw, who's such a great trainer of top coaches and, a coach in his own right, for sure. And he's written a book called Become Champion Minded. right? So that's awesome. I've had the same experience. I come in and I'm coaching and they go, oh, well, the best you can hope for is to be second place because school X wins the championship every year. And I go, no, I'm here to win the championship myself. So this is what we're doing. Yeah, okay. And I was at a school where everyone believed second place was the best you could do.
Yep.
Right. And
Yep.
so in my in my first year at the school, we almost beat that team. And in my second year at the school, we had our first league championship in 26 years.
Wow.
Here's the funny part. My kids ended up going to the school that was our rival. And I went in the gym where up on the wall, they have painted all the championship years of every school. And I counted them up and they were on 19 straight years.
Wow.
And you know what? I felt so good about not letting you get to 20 because 20 is a nice number.
Yeah, in a row for sure.
20 is a nice number. Yeah. So I show my kids, I'm like, hey, what happened in 1996 right there? So yeah. So anyway, no, it's an important thing. And the same thing happened. I had a group of kids that were they were USTA, all of them are USTA tournament players, all ranked in the top 100 in our section, a lot of them, top 50. And they would lose in the first round of the playoffs. And I'm like, and so I come in this like the number 3 highest performing public school in California. And I told the kids this, well, it's nice to be here with you underachievers. And then their jaws dropped. Right. But in my first year there, we took out the number 1 seed, but even though we lost in the semis later, but then the next year we won it. And then my girls won it the next year. Anyway, I think so. I jumped way too much in on that one. But yes, belief is the number 1 thing. And it doesn't mean, I've had to break 71 match losing streaks too. So it doesn't mean always being at the top. It means ending futility too sometimes. All right. So what's another thing, a conventional wisdom thing, especially when it comes to player development, and how we teach strokes?
Well, there's often, and I've mentioned this in all 3 of my books, and the conventional wisdom is a false belief that if you teach inferior but easier to master strokes early on with the belief that you're going to get a kid playing tennis earlier, you're going to get them having fun, that you're going to be able to change them later. And the hardest, worst player to develop into a skilled player is the exact player I just defined or just exampled, that player who learned inferior grips, inferior strokes, inferior footwork, inferior strategies. And now we want to take that player, change their grip, because it's never just a grip change. It's a grip change involves contact point change, position change, stance change, swing path change, et cetera, et cetera. So players or coaches who say, hey, it's just a grip change, you are wrong. You are absolutely wrong.
Right.
Because it is never just a grip change. And so that's one aspect. And so we train all of our players in what I define as, or call in my books, the advanced foundation. So we are teaching advanced strokes, advanced grips, and I don't even call them advanced. It's just what skilled tennis is all about. And my belief is, I challenge anybody to prove me wrong, but tennis seems to be the only sport that as a learning mentality or methodology or philosophy is that we can teach inferior methods first. And I've got 117 books on tennis that all say this. So it's not just me giving you examples, but I have 117 books that say this exact thing. The beginner can use an Eastern grip on the serve or Eastern grips on the volley or, different things. But they all say that as a player wants to become more competitive, they're going to have to change. Well,
right.
Name a sport that teaches an inferior methodology.
Right.
And that is, golf, football, baseball. We train the sport just as Michael Jordan shoots a basketball or Tiger Woods swings a golf club. We teach 6-year-olds that same stroke or throwing method.
Let me interject for a second because because I want to speak to the skeptical for a second. So every time I get a new like 6 or 7-year-old who's taking private lessons, I ask them this question. I said, "Hey, I can teach you a serve grip that will make it easier for you to learn how to serve sooner, but then later you're going to hate me because you have a bad habit and you're not going to be able to be the greatest. Right. Or I can teach you this grip. It's going to take a little bit longer, but then you can serve like a pro." What do they choose?
They want to be a pro.
I mean, I think one kid in the last 5 years has said, "Teach me the easy way." And then I know, okay, well, this kid doesn't have the mentality.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I have a phrase that I like to kind of use that. And I simply in tongue in cheek say, I don't know anybody who picks up a tennis racket and says, "Gee, I'd love to play tennis, but I really want to suck at it."
Yeah.
I mean, that's sort of, and I don't even ask players, because beginning players, whether we're talking about a kid or an adult, I never ask them, how good do you want to be? Because what happens is some kids have a self-perception of, well, I just kind of exploring this or just want to get till I can play the sport. You teach them an advanced foundation, they start to love the sport in a way because they start hitting shots that they never dreamed possible. They start seeing themselves hit the ball like they see on TV. They start seeing themselves hit shots that are more fun to hit and defend shots. So their rallies are more exciting rather than dink, 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 dink to have a so-called good time.
Right.
And so they start developing a love and a belief that they can achieve greatness. So I don't usually put a ceiling on a player by asking them, how good do you want to be? I usually say, you're going to learn the best tennis of your life, and you're going to be able to take this for the rest of your life and become a great player.
That's awesome. Okay, so let's do this. Let's wrap up this part with where do you start? That is, and I find it surprising. I mean, when I heard what you do, I'm like, oh, that's weird. So where does it start?
In terms of how do we start the advanced foundation?
You start the advanced foundation where, and everybody get ready to be sort of shocked when you find out what Dave does. Ready, go.
Well, we definitely start everybody with the volley. And because what we're trying, if you look at all skilled strokes, the main grip of two-handed backhand, forehand, backhand volley, serve, overhead are all based on one grip at the highest levels, continental grip. What's the most unfamiliar grip for most beginners? Continental grip. So we start with training, not just the volley, and we don't stay on the volley, exclusively for months. Obviously, we're just talking a day or even part of a lesson, but we're teaching not just the volley, but we're teaching how to become familiar and comfortable with the continental grip through different exercises and tools, even before the volley. That I go over in my books, and I talk about all the different ways that you can create that. So coaches that say, oh, the continental grip is too hard for a beginner. So we start them with a full swinging top spin grip, ground stroke, which is a forehand usually, or two-handed backhand, but usually the forehand. And the hardest player to change to develop a serve, a volley, a two-handed backhand is the player who starts with a full swinging top spin, Eastern forehand, semi-Western grip, because now we have to shorten the stroke if we're talking about a volley. If we're talking about serve, we're talking about continental grip, et cetera, et cetera. So we start with the volley, we move to the serve, we move to the two-handed backhand because that is a continental grip on the dominant hand. In most cases, Jim Courier was probably the one exception who had an Eastern backhand grip with a two-handed grip. And then relatively quickly, we move, once we kind of start training within these many different drills and training programs, we move to the tops and forwards.
All right. No, that's a great answer. And I just want to make one comment, and then I want to switch over to the visual training thing.
Got it.
So So no, I think that the interesting thing about that is that already what you're doing is you're solving problems of mitigating potential weaknesses before they occur, right? Then
Exactly.
then you don't have the player who's strictly a baseliner who says I can't play the net,
Right.
right? And you know, the serve is under taught, under practiced, right? And so is the overhead, right?
Right.
And generally people are, their backhands are their weakness generally, globally, right? And so you mitigate that first, and now you have players who have more options and are less attackable.
Yep.
So,
And the beauty, let me jump on that real shortly.
yeah.
The thing we're doing is we're not limiting a player who may have an affinity, say, for the wanting to be at the net, or serve or volley or overhead better, because that is a weak stroke because of the way they were taught. We always want to play or teach a player to reach their potential based on personality, their perception of all strengths and whatnot. So that's kind of what we're thinking in terms of why we teach what we teach.
Yeah. So, you know, it's funny, unlimiting your potential means not training weaknesses into your game.
Or limitations, yes.
Yeah, if you're training weaknesses into your game by starting in the wrong spot, then you are limited by those weaknesses. So
right.
All right. Right. So now now I'm going to start talking a little bit about the visual thing, because some of you are aware that I wrote a book called Visual Training for Tennis, if I haven't been beating the drum constantly. Anyway, so visual skills are the missing link in two very important places in the game. They reduce the barrier to becoming a tennis player because half the population sees in a way that we don't teach. And I'm going to explain what that is in a little bit. I'm going to hint at that, but half the population has a different way of seeing than the other half of the population. Okay. Number two, those that figure it out for themselves or are cross-dextral still have a limiting factor below 4-5 because we only teach one aspect of vision, and we don't teach it concisely and with skills attached. There are no skills attached. So what do people say? Watch the ball, keep your eye on the ball, right. You know, blah, blah, blah. And that's it doesn't say anything. Those words really don't have a lot of meaning, but the only benefit there is that somebody could figure it out for themselves. Mm-hmm. And if they accidentally do, then they can be a tennis player. If they don't, they'll quit because tennis will be too difficult. And there's something that happens at the 4-5 level where all of a sudden now the ball's coming faster. People are better athletes. You have to concentrate better for longer periods of time. And you're starting to see a lot more variable spin. And the spin is the number one visual challenge. So a couple of questions that are going to be answered and why they're important. These are the questions that are going to be answered in my talk. What are the 3 most common and catastrophic visual errors and how to fix them? And number one, I can tell you, the number one error that people make, nearly 100% of the people who step onto my tennis court, no matter how good they are, from beginner to 5-0, they're making this mistake. And then when we solve that problem in a matter of minutes, their game takes a leap. All right.
Love it.
Another question that we're going to answer is, why is it important to know what is your dominant eye and how do you use it? Because we have very little or no intentionality behind that. What's the difference between pure and cross-dextral? And why are we not very good at teaching pure dextral? So if you know the answers to these questions, you don't have to come. you don't have to take my course because you know enough to unlimit your potential. But if you don't know the answers to these questions, you're missing out. What are some practical exercises that you can perform to improve your vision of the ball? And I have some news. I'm really excited about the 4th edition because actually I've met a visual researcher who has turned me on to some really new stuff. Now, here's a crazy thing. Okay, I want you to experiment with this, but there's research that says, so I'm going to teach for a second. You're going to get one piece of content here, so listen up, right? Monocular occlusion helps your eyes to actually pair better. All right, so what is monocular occlusion? It's covering an eye, right? So go get an eye patch or a Band-Aid or some gauze and some tape and cover your player's non-dominant eye first. Hit for about 5 minutes. It's going to be weird. It's not going to look great, right? Then do 5 minutes with the dominant eye covered. And then it's really amazing how that visual occlusion exercising will help the eyes pair. The dominant eye will actually do a better job of helping the non-dominant eye track with it.
Yep.
Because the dominant eye is the lead dog, right? And the non-dominant eye tracks with the dominant eye, but you also have to let the dominant eye have its time on its own, right? To appreciate the lead dog. All right, so that's one practical exercise you can do today. And then what is the system of a tennis shot and how does your perception transition through phases? So I just want to give the framework of that really quick, is that the system goes like this. The ball hits the other player's racket. Right. Something happens by the time the ball has come out by 2 feet, which I will explain. It travels over the net. It bounces. You contact it with your racket. It flies away from you. It bounces or it doesn't because the other person could be at the net. They hit it. System complete. And there are at least 3 different skills that your eyes perform during that time. And I'm going to flesh that out. And also, there's no finite time that any one person transitions between these skills. I don't think anybody understands the variables there, but it does happen. All right. So I'm done with kind of introducing what's going to happen in the visual training. So you're going to tell us a little more about what kinds of things you're going to be teaching in the. So is your whole talk the advanced foundation?
Well, it's based on the advanced foundation, and advanced foundation is going to take into account exactly what you're talking about, because the advanced foundation allows a player to now use these tools that you're presenting, which is, I love the fact that you and I are actually for the first time going to be presenting together, because I feel that we piggyback skill sets that are going to be. So what I'm going to be doing is talking about the advanced foundation. What is it? How is it achieved? How do you move a player from beginner to advanced very quickly? And then on-court portion I'll be talking about 75 drills, and obviously very rapid fire drills that all can be using your tool of either using covering dominant eye, non-dominant eye. We talk a lot about one-footed drills to teach balance. We do things. I try to teach and coach that allow a student to self-discover through the methodology or the tool or the challenge, I guess you could call it, of the drill.
Okay,
so
tell you what.
Yeah.
Tell you what. So why don't you teach us that one thing about challenging balance? So how does that work?
Well, one of the things that we tell our players to hit as hard as they can once they've developed an advanced foundation swing pattern, which means they can create a repeatable, reliable swing path on command that is within the context of the advanced stroke, the effective stroke, topspin, slice, whatever shot we're working on. But we want them to develop that stroke to not only be able to hit it on command, but start building on hitting it with more spin, more speed, more velocity, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you do that without them swinging out of their shoes, so to speak? Well, if you teach a one-footed drill where they're bouncing, say, on their left foot on a forehand or right foot on a backhand or left foot on a serve, they cannot overhit a ball because they'll fall over. So it's sort of like the analogy we tell kids, pretend like you have books on your head. And so they swing with the balance, and we call it in golf, teaching golf, we call it the same thing, creating a spine angle that is maintained throughout the stroke. So when we're talking about, we're a little more upright than in golf, but the idea is to retain the spine angle. So the player's not dipping down, leaning back. You know, as players get harder and harder, that's what you see players do. So now they have a tool, but 1 foot stroke, balancing books, and the third part that we'll be training is called holding the finish. When a player knows they're going to hold their finish, whether it's a volley, whether it's a ground stroke, whatever it is, they will never overhit because they know they're going to hold their finish. So if it's a backhand, if they know they're going to hold that finish, they'll never overhit beyond their capability.
Yep, that's good. All right.
Go ahead.
Awesome. Yeah, I want to throw one thing in there, and then I want to get into the two-handed backhand. All right. So this is something I haven't thought about for probably 10 years. So you know how you forget stuff and then you So Dennis Ralston got Chris Evert back to #1 in the world. And then there was this article about what did he do, right? So he did a thing where he had her put her left hand on her forehead as she was hitting her ground stroke, right? I mean, obviously she couldn't hit her two-handed backhand on her forehand. So what that did is it helped her to realize what was her balance, right? And then, you know, when you put your hand there, you realize, oh, wait, my head and my eyes are moving much more than they need to be, you know, blah, blah, blah. So this is a great exercise to do a balance training with the head, because then you start to realize, you know, what's happening there. And then you take your hand off and you can still kind of feel there's this after feeling of, oh yeah, do you still remember where your forehead is?
Yeah.
Right? So
love it.
So that's a really good thing. All right, I'm going to jump into what we're going to teach about the two-handed backhand. And so here's a question that I'm going to ask the audience. How many styles of two-handed backhand do you teach? Right? How many styles are within the USTA player development parameters? And I happen to really like those parameters. I think they've done a really good job with that piece for sure. Okay. What's the origin story and the social data that I have behind what I've developed? So, you know, and a piece of that, it comes from John Yandel, who did a great presentation about 15 years ago about the 4 distinct styles of two-handed backhand, because his advanced tennis research project had spent, you know, thousands of hours doing slow motion video, and he was the discoverer of these things.
Yep.
But then I've now spent 10 years researching how to teach those, and I've made some discoveries along the way. So I want to be able to share those. But I think the most important thing there is that I'm finding that somewhere around 20% of people are actually most suited to hitting a one-handed backhand, and about 25% of people are suited to hitting a left-hand dominant two-handed backhand.
Yep.
And there are 2 other styles. And out of the 4 styles, 2 of them, there's 2 pairs that run completely counter to the other styles. So if you're trying to teach one of them to somebody who's not predisposed to that, it's going to be garbage. So, all right. And then why do I see very little idiosyncratic movements in my players' strokes moving forward? So if you have players who have strange idiosyncrasies in how they stroke, I'm going to say you're probably teaching them a style that doesn't jive with who they are, right? And why are there 4 styles and not just the left-hand dominant two-handed shot that the bulk of people are teaching. Why is that true? So we're going to get into all that. And the short answer is it has to do with laterality. And so if you're a tennis pro and laterality is a new word for you, you might want to do a little homework before we get there. All right. So as we're kind of getting close to wrapping up here, what's another thing that you want to share to kind of bait the hook to get people to come on out?
Well, definitely everything we're sharing right now should be baiting a massive hook, because there's so much learning going on, but just in what we've talked about. Certainly within the advanced foundation, we're the understanding that when you give a player an advanced foundation, it frees them up to explore the idiosyncrasies you just brought up, as opposed to when the player is taught inferior methods, they are now pigeonholed into a technique that has very strong limitations, very limited flexibility to evolve that. Whereas an advanced foundation, if you look at all the pros, you can look at them and say two things. One, they all look the same, or B, they all look different. It depends on what you're looking for and identifying. And so the advanced foundation allows that personal, idiosyncratic personality, perception of strengths and weaknesses to emerge rather than be stifled and talking about what you just did. So I think the greatest value of this program, between you and me and Chuck coming in as well, is the fact that we're going to be presiding on similar concepts that feed on each other, that literally allow players to grow as a person and as a coach or a pro, expand that opportunity to create more champions. Basically, let's simplify it. We're going to create champions.
Okay, so I'm gonna throw some but seatbelts kill people logic at you, and then you come back with something. All right,
give me a devil's advocate.
Okay, yeah, but Boris Becker and his forehand grip serve, but Alberto Sbarasategi, right, with his Hawaiian grip. I mean, it was so Western, they weren't sure what part of the Pacific Ocean it was in, right?
Yep.
It crossed the international date line.
Well, I've got an answer for you.
Okay.
And it's a very logical, very science-based answer. And that is, they all learned an advanced foundation and evolved that. Now, I will argue Boris Becker technically did not use an Eastern forehand grip on his serve. He used a weak continental that he turned his wrist to mimic an Eastern forehand grip relative to his forearm. A lot of people look at his racket relative to his forearm and they go, "Oh, that's an Eastern forehand grip." But if you really look at his grip, it was a continental grip turned inward, so it looked like he was taking it back like an Eastern forehand grip. So that's one thing that a lot of people miss.
And here's what I'm taking from what you're saying, right? This is another issue in coaching, is there's what people think they see.
Yes, exactly.
So exactly. This is an interesting thing. And that was part of the beauty of what John Yandel did, because he took the super slow motion video and then it's like, oh, wow, it's really hard to argue with that. Do you see yet? Right. And that's why I think it's so important that we use super slow motion video with our students, because then they can't argue with that video. Right. Do you see what you're doing there? Because I don't know how many times I've had students say, "I'm not doing that." I'm like, well, the picture's not lying, is it? Yep. You think my camera made this up?
Yeah. Well, and on the second part of your example of the devil's advocate, okay, do you train to the exception or do you train to the rule? And if we are going to train to the exception, we'll teach everyone with, like, Fru McMillan with an index finger up the shaft of the racket, or something bizarre. But you have to look at it from a scientific, because Monica Seles was a two-handed forehand, and I train a lot of two-handed forehands because I've done the science behind how the two-handed forehand propagates into a great one-handed forehand, great learning tool, both halves of the brain, et cetera, et cetera. So I never teach to the exception unless the exception, the Fosbury flop and high jumping, if the exception is scientifically sound, then we look at it in a viable mechanism. But that being said, you've got to understand that the science of high performance tennis is pretty well, it's been studied and it's still being studied today. But we train to the rule, not the exception, unless I said the exception is a viable mechanism to allow a student to progress. And we never prohibit a student from exploring. We give them ways to explore something new within the advanced foundation, so they start to go, oh, that felt awesome, or that created the optimal spin with the maximum speed, et cetera, with control. So those are all kind of the answer to the exception to the rule question.
Yeah. And so I'm going to finish with this. This is my final thought. So every once in a while, I will get like a 3-5 woman player, 3-5 4-0, and she says, I hit my backhand volley with two hands, and you're not going to get me to change, right? It will not happen. X number of pros have tried to make me change that, right? I'm like, okay, let's work with it. I'm going to help you to have the very best two-handed backhand volley you can have. Because I don't have time to fight with you. You've already told me it's not negotiable. We will dig into that shot and make yours the best one possible. And because part of it is gaining the trust, maybe in 7 years, I will be able to work with her and have her hit a one.
Well, there are two-handed volleyers on tour. Not a lot, but there's a few. And it can be taken to the highest level. There's some, limitations.
Drew McMillan, great example, right? One of the greatest doubles players of all time.
Right. I mean, it goes back to the 70s when Bjorn Borg won the French Open or Wimbledon, whichever. I think it was French Open he won first. And the reporters were going, well, when are you going to start hitting a one-handed backhand? Because it was so rare to see a two-handed backhand, and when he was 18, 17, however old was. And that was the belief. I mean, no one believed you could hit a two-handed backhand and win the French Open. He did. And
when I grow up, when I become a man.
Well, and the rest is history. But I mean,
awesome.
But good. Well, I hope everybody will look at this opportunity who come to Alabama, or I'm sure this will not be the only conference that you and I, piggyback each other on and go forward and do. So I'm hoping a lot of conferences will reach out to us, because I think we have a lot of experience. I've got 45 years. You probably got that many years. I think you're a little older than me.
30 plus. Yeah. I'm like, I'm getting close to 70 now. Yeah.
Sure you are. But there's not only experience between us, but success. And my team's won at last count 1,120 some odd matches and lost less than 20 times. That is, basically speaks for itself, and how I've developed teams in large groups. And that's another thing to close on. At this conference, I'll be sharing how to effectively train large groups, whether you're at a club, academy, high school, junior high, whatever. There are ways that I've trained. I average 50 players on a team, and I usually have maybe one assistant. So come out. I'm going to be sharing the drills we do with huge numbers of players and effectively and efficiently coach them. So that's what I'm also going to be adding in all my program conference lectures as well.
Awesome. Yeah. And so here's my closing thought is that I'm really happy that Dave and I are friends, and we've done some planning. We've done some thinking in order to make this, to diversify our offerings so that, you're not only getting one thing. We're going to have, the advanced foundation. We're going to talk a little bit about the visual stuff. We're going to have some two-hand and backhand stuff. Dave's thing is a little more comprehensive. He's the big dog, right? And then we got some other things to kind of mix it up there. But anyway, hey, thanks for your time, Dave, and can't wait to hang out with you in Birmingham. It looks like we're going to Jenny Rob's restaurant.
Nice.
I guess I got to book a table. But yeah, send me your flight info, and then I will book a table for dinner.
Well, I'm looking forward to Bill. It's going to be a blast. I hope everyone out there that's in the Birmingham, Alabama area will come to this event. Hopefully the COVID thing is diminished so we can at least bump elbows and have some fun. But it's going to be a great time.
Yep. And then John Eagleton came on just at the end to say hi, guys. And
hi, John.
Awesome.
He's
He's a great friend too. So, all right. Take care.